and Utsav in this degenerate class.
I'm a horrible student. But we'll always get the job done.
All right, Natasha, you're the leader today. You're the screen sharer. You're the talker. You're the intro maker. Utsav, you weren't here last time. Basically, what we did was whoever picked the articles summarized them pretty shortly, and so that takes about a minute, and then we discuss anything that makes you think of for the next 3 to 4 minutes, and then Natasha's responsible, or whoever has the article, for the transition to the next one, and we do 4 articles, 4 to 6 minutes each, and then we retire is the idea.
Got it. Sounds fun.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Great summary. Thanks, David. All right, so this week on Planet Internet with the Hackanoon editors, we have David, Utsav, Amy, and myself, Natasha. Speaking of planets, let's start with some props to the 12,000 developers GitHub says contributed to Ingenuity's software via open source. I think that this is referring, of course, to the maiden helicopter voyage in the Martian atmosphere. That was big news today and yesterday. And yeah, I think this is a pretty cool initiative from GitHub. Basically, they're going to put a Mars 2020 helicopter mission badge on the GitHub profile of every developer who contributed to the specific versions of any open source projects and libraries used by Ingenuity. So yeah, what do you guys think of that? And what do you think of space as a concept? I mean, as a destination on your list or nah?
This is truly the beauty of open source, I feel.
I would like to go to space. Definitely would like to go to space.
Would you?
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Like,
Doesn't
have you
seem
guys
so
noticed,
homey, you know?
like, have you guys noticed that whenever like something is like related to government, space, it's always open source. Closed source like stays just in the offices. We had this big news come out of India where every government employee was asked to learn how to use Linux because nobody wanted to pay for Windows. And we can see something very similar with these guys. They have billions of dollars of budget, but they always want to go open source. What do you guys think? Is it because of the security, or is it because like people want to save that last dime for all of those research and whatnot?
I think it's definitely like saving the cost for sure. If they go open source, then it's like community driven and more marketing, perhaps a better word of mouth, and then they don't have to pay the developers. Woo woo! What a win!
Whoever open sources it naturally has a powerful market position. So the government wants to not have space be privatized. So I think if the government comes in from an altruistic point of view and says the best thing about space should be open sourced, they're more likely to gain market share of the space industry in the future. So I think it's all selfish and people are self-driven. And also really if the core of this announcement is it's a badge on a profile, like don't get too crazy. Like
people will go nuts for those badges though, I feel.
Right.
It's like a pride badge of honor. Look at me, I helped develop the Mars contributor.
how would you describe the design of the badge? Who wants to do that for our audio listeners?
It looks like a drone on its way to Mars against a nice purple space looking sky.
So I mean, have you seen what you're describing as a drone is the helicopter? Have you guys seen the video? Have you guys seen the video of the helicopter flights? This is what I love about space travel the most, I think, and all of the recent news around it, is that every time you hear like amazing footage of XYZ happening on space, and then you check it out. And I mean, if you could describe this video for our listeners, I think just first of all, good luck spotting aforementioned drone / helicopter. And then
It looks like getting placed in the middle of the Sahara Desert.
exactly that.
There's nothing. See, this is why I don't really necessarily want to go to space. It looks like there's nothing.
It looks kind of like a mosquito is flying, as you say, in the dune
Yeah.
of some kind of sub-Saharan African landscape. But this is a big deal, right? And I think it was 39 seconds. So yeah, props
There's
to
absolutely no life there. Like there's no plants, there's no animals, nothing. It's like just rock. It's just a giant rock.
All right, let me be the paranoid one. Anyone think this is a deep fake?
I mean, probably.
That's why they had to save money and like they had to go open source. They did not have the budget for it. It all makes sense. But like
Well-
I was reading somewhere and it was saying that even landing these things on like whether it is the moon or the surface of Mars, it needs to be at a very specific speed. It cannot go over, it cannot go under. They have to control the speed right from the like detachment from the actual like whatever shuttle goes in and then what gets dropped over there. And like they have lost so many like rovers or whatever they call just because they were not able to get the speed right. It was off by what, a few like meters per second or something like that, and they lost those rovers. It's quite exciting when you like read about these things and say, okay, now we can do that.
Exactly. And just how territorial everybody gets about it. I mean, there's a lot of great thinking and writing about space on Hacker Noon, for example. Shout out to one of my favorite space writers, Monica Hernandez. And Anthony Watson recently wrote about the United States losing the space race. It's always, hyper competitive. But speaking of races being raced and won or lost, what do we think of Facebook's quote unquote pivot to audio? I don't know if you guys catch this, but Casey Newton, independent journalist, quote unquote launched a Discord server called Side Channel over the weekend with some fellow independent journalists, and then just as casually interviewed Zuckerberg on it on Monday. And this is obviously part of some kind of PR Zuckerberg is doing for some Facebook pivoting. There's a lot of creator first messaging around it, and a lot of the leveraging of audio. For those who didn't catch this, the summary of what Newton means when he talks about the Facebook's pivot to audio is sound bites, which is a new format for creative short form audio, much like TikTok. Then also long form audio, obviously trying to capitalize on the emotion behind podcasts, for example. You just really can't get that kind of brand affinity in other formats. I feel personally, I mean, what are we trying to achieve for this podcast, right? Is let people in, see what's happening behind the scenes at Hacker Noon, what we're talking about, what we're focused on. You really get like an intimacy with audio that Facebook is trying to capitalize on quite clearly. And then of course, compete with Clubhouse, compete/copycat, however you want to look at it. So yeah, how do you guys feel about Facebook's pivot to audio?
I love audio as a medium just because I think it's so interesting and engaging even without video content, and people can listen to it on the go. And obviously millennials are extremely drawn to podcasting. I think that's they're the big age group that's interested in the audio format, and I think it'll be interesting to see the short-term audio format, like a TikTok version, and how that interacts with Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
Spoken like the Hacker Noon podcast host.
Yeah.
A few things here stand out to me. Real validation for Clubhouse that Facebook has to partner up with Spotify to power this. So that's like really big validation for Clubhouse in terms of the big boys have to team up to try and take out your market share. Relating to Hacker Noon, great to see that they're experimenting with an emoji as processing the tip. as we look at using the money bag emoji for our writers. So like cool to see that like that behavior is happening, even if we didn't get there first. Obviously, we're not even in the same realm as whatever the hell Mark Zuckerberg is doing on a Tuesday. Much different than our Tuesdays. I mean, I think that Facebook just waits for someone else to do it well, and they do it. It's almost at this point, what was that German company, the Rocket Internet, that they just waited for every imitator and then they rebuilt it in Germany? I think like the older Facebook gets, the more like some of their choices seem to be about that and not about their users.
Yeah. And did anybody notice that it said Facebook's currency stars? What happened to Libra? Like they had Libra, it's gone.
What happened to Libra?
What happened to Libra?
Like MasterCard pulled out, Visa pulled out, everybody else started to pull out, and I'm seeing that like Facebook currency is now stars. Okay. This is nice. This is nice.
Yeah, how the did you hear of stars before this article?
No,
Anybody?
I just saw this. And who named it stars?
Super
Like,
casual, Mark Zuckerberg, super cash.
The other cool thing about this article that I think Casey actually does a good job of explaining is like when Facebook did pivot to video, they kind of positioned it publicly as like, this is something for the little guy, but really they were commissioning all the big guys, CNN on down, to produce videos on their platform. And then once they had enough videos, they started cutting off distribution of the big guy. And here you see again, Zuckerberg is saying this is all about the little guy, but what they're going to do is seed the marketplace heavy. And they're going to bring in the influencers, they're going to bring in the power players and bring in these big audio rooms and compete with Clubhouse. And so they kind of are doing this thing where like, how are they spending their money versus how are they talking about it? And there's a clear dichotomy happening that like Casey can call him out because he can message Mark Zuckerberg and he knows him enough, but he also wants him to message again and come back to his Discord server. So he's not going to go as far as calling out exactly how this money behavior is different from what he's saying. But he kind of walks the line if you go back and forth on this article. That I appreciated it.
yeah, he says it right
Yeah,
there.
Facebook is always about making money and never about their users. Not really about small businesses either. So
can I share a random face thought with you guys? So I was in the park, all right, watching my daughter, and there's all these kids with masks, and I was thinking like how this changes their development. And here's an obscure gut prediction is people that live during the pandemic from like 4 to 10 are much more likely to get face tattoos later in life than the generation before them.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think? Outside the box? This is what Facebook made me think of.
I hope not.
I hope not either, but I think there are some developmental things going on that may not be healthy for future tattoos with the volume of masks that everyone's wearing. But this is probably something I should put all of our listeners under NDA for, let them know this is a thought that I don't want distributed, and that's all, folks.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'd be more worried about what is it that these guys would be tattooing on their faces, because art changes like every 5 or 6 years, and we just have no idea what is it that they find cool. Like there is a very different definition of cool back in our days, or at least my day, because Amy is young.
Well, I mean, speaking of face tattoos, did anybody catch Travis Barker, who, for those of you who were born around my sort of generation, is the drummer for Blink-182?
Yeah.
First albums I ever bought. So anyway, Travis Barker posted a happy birthday Instagram to, was it Kourtney, a Kardashian, of her sucking his thumb. He is heavily tattooed, which is the link.
Interesting.
My point being, we live in a world where like face tattoos blend with Kardashians, blend with like podcasts, but it's a crazy time to be alive. But what I think, to bring it back to Zuckerberg, is interesting about his kind of trying to meld with this individual creator economy, is that it's almost reminiscent of the way that institutions want to regulate any kind of revolutionary or potentially disruptive forces. Zuckerberg now seems kind of like coming out late out of the gate to say like, oh, I'm on the side of individual creators after this video thing, where he paid publications to create content. Now he's suddenly seeing the success of TikTok and trying to capitalize on that. And yeah, I'm kind of with Amy on that. I just don't trust it. I don't trust anything he does.
No, because he seems like all he wants to do is like affect his triple bottom line, right? He doesn't give a shit about what affects his users or small businesses or anything like that. Like on Facebook, as a small business, you can't do anything unless you put money into your post.
And yet he would still rather let you own your audience than pay you. I believe one of the takeaways from this is that, he's going to follow the Substack model of you can take your subscribers with you should you want to leave one day, which is like apparently a big draw card as opposed to monetization, which I think is interesting and maybe not that sustainable.
Well, don't you love this right here? Stop on that line. The Substack margin is Facebook's opportunity. See my ethics disclosure about Substack. Every time it's mentioned, he has to put this in. It's like, okay, great. I mean, they take 10% and they send your email. Like, it's like, that's what they do. And Zuckerberg's coming in. This is where Zuckerberg's clearly right. Going closer to the credit card fee is much more reasonable and being more like 2 or 3%. Like Substack taking 10% of your subscriber base. Great, I can take my emails with me, but your tax is like higher than the state income tax, or depending where you are. Sales tax, is generally less than 10%. So it's pretty high to process a transaction. So I think Facebook doing this is going to make Substack drop their revenue share to stay competitive, which is a good thing for anyone who sends an email.
At the end of the
That's
day,
interesting because the draw of like in the marketing sense of like these kinds of platforms is that like your audience lives on that platform and you can't take them anywhere else and you don't own them. So whatever happens to Facebook, if it blows up, if something happens, if they change their policies, you don't own any of your audience there.
Not only do you not own it, but once you leave, they will feed your audience related content. Like it's like once you left Medium, they just looked at our subscriber list and sent them all 01 stories about tech. And it's like, that's like, look alike or just send them similar stuff. It's once you have the platform, I can't export all my Twitter followers. What's it matter if 15,000 people follow me? If Twitter doesn't feel like surfacing my tweet, I can't reach those people. So I think this whole movement of email contacts and creators valuing email contacts and platforms offering portability, it's all the right direction. It's just, it feels like the wrong people are doing it.
I think two things that were super interesting for me to sum up on this article were that Zuckerberg clearly understands that content is still king and keeping users in app to consume that content is paramount to the success of his platforms. And then the last kind of takeaway from this article is phrased as, and I'm quoting, Zuckerberg argues that some of the negative attitudes about Facebook are explained by the same forces propelling the success of creators, the shift in power from institutions to individuals, which I just, is he arguing that it's kind of like a Republican agenda that is, away from the individual, that is pushing for the regulation of big tech and appealing to like the left here, or what? I mean, I'm not in America. I don't understand the sort of nuances probably as well, but it feels very political a statement. It feels very, he's talking about this regulation. He earlier asserts that audio moderation is going to be more difficult. I mean, we're not going to be able to stop extremist stuff from happening on podcasts that are hosted on Facebook or in groups, because he predicts, for example, the Clubhouse version going to be very popular with groups. So that's going to be almost impossible to moderate. And then there's this kind of low-level attack on moderation and the forces and the negative attitudes. So I also found that interesting. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
And yet they're willing to shut down Facebook in entire countries.
Yeah, Australia just banned it.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to just ask you guys really quick. Like, do you guys think that moderating audio is like all that hard? Like, we have been able to moderate video as like YouTube does it, but moderating audio like shouldn't be hard. It's just like tracking those like bars or graphs or whatever.
I mean, YouTube has a lot of dark rabbit holes. They get shut
Exactly.
down, but
Yeah.
there are like, you're going to be the host of those dark rabbit holes for some period of time. And then they try and trim down that period of time to get the darkest things off the internet. So whenever you're at their scale, a dark rabbit hole may only last a day, but suddenly you're live streaming a killing, which has happened many times on Facebook that you don't see in this discussion here.
That's for sure. Like it will be
Yeah.
a process before it gets better.
Yeah, I think it's hard to monitor everything, of course, but as content goes viral, as with the cases of certain killings that happened on Facebook Live or whatever, Facebook will be more in tuned and notified into what's going on with their audio programs, I guess. They'll have to monitor it for at least a while to make sure that it's working.
And it's Facebook at the end of the day. Like these guys are best positioned in terms of like money bags. Like they have the means to like pull stuff off in the like best way possible. Like they have the money for it. It's just whether they can or not. They would answer that question.
Okay, Mark Zuckerberg, please don't penalize any of our posts. We're sorry. We play. We're playing in the game as well.
At the
Did I tell you about the one Hacker Noon thing that got monitored from Facebook? It was our Hacker Noon when we released a special edition of the Hacker Noon t-shirt where $10 went to EFF for every t-shirt sold. It got marked as a sex item. And because the shirt was so sexy that you couldn't have it, filtered or be promoted. And it was a plain black t-shirt with the Hacker Noon logo. And because of that, then we popularized that and sold more t-shirts.
Yep.
Great. Everybody wins in the end. All right. On to the next piece. On speaking of things people want to regulate and moderate, blockchain. And that's why I'm glad Atsov's here today with us, our resident expert on the subject. This article from Hacker Noon is called 3 Reasons Why Blockchain Won't Release the Kraken. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it is an interview with John Siebes of trustthevote.org. I really liked the setup for this article, so I'm just going to read that to you real quick. Echo chambers are arguably the worst thing to come out of our social media-centric lives since that auntie of yours who comments how grown up you now look on every photo that you post. While it's a lot of fun discussing big topics with people I wholeheartedly agree with, such as Emilia or Gerard, referring to previous interviews, what's life without a little heated debate, right? And thanks to Freeton's active role as a member of the Government Blockchain Association, I get to chew the metaphorical cud with those on both sides of the fence. So this interview with John Siebes by Benjamin Bateman kind of sets up as the fact that the author disagrees with the interviewee on a controversial statement, and that statement is such: any system which claims to be blockchain voting is neither blockchain nor voting. Thoughts?
Let's go to our blockchain editor.
Tapping in. What's up?
I'm gonna call a friend.
Oh, definitely. Like anything like is like whenever somebody asks like people in the blockchain side of things, and we are always ready with our pens and papers, and we are like, I'm so glad you asked. So I have that mentality right now. So it's a very like controversial claim, because when you talk about blockchain voting, and the claim over here is that it is neither blockchain nor is it voting, because let's assume that there will always be certain wrong votes cast or bad ballots cast. Like people in the US might remember about that butterfly ballot scandal, which is like given as the reason why. I'm not sure whether I'm getting the names right, but that's the reason why people say Al Gore lost, or like some other president lost. So the rationale is that people are very likely to make mistakes, and on the blockchain, you are not allowed to make mistakes. So when you make a mistake, when you cast a wrong vote, or if the machine fumbles and registers a wrong vote, can you go back and change it? No, you cannot, because the diagram that you see over here, it is called a Merkle root. How this works, and again, I'm very happy to explain that. The ones at the lower end, the ones that you say hash transaction A and hash transaction B, you need both of them. Like both of these are cryptographic proofs. You need both of these to get an answer which will give you the one just above it. And then just above it is the root, or what you call the Merkle root. So it allows like storage of transactions in a very distributed manner, saves space. It's very good from a database standpoint, but it doesn't answer that question. Like once somebody goes in there, you cannot change it. And a big part of voting is like whenever you have cast your vote, as we see sometimes in Switzerland, I guess it is, where you can recall your votes. So you can say that, okay, I do not like that person who I had voted, and by a majority of sorts, you can call that guy back. That is called direct democracy. On the blockchain, you cannot have anything like that. The same goes for the blockchain side of things. It takes time to process a vote. It won't get like validated easily. There can be 51% attacks. How do you fight that? When there are billions of dollars like loading on stuff, when you see people in Russia allegedly like trying to interfere with the elections in the US, which is like at least in my opinion, one of the strongest democracies after my own India. So shout out to my country. Like definitely we are the largest, right? So how that goes is like when there is so much meddling happening, when there is so much money at stake, power at stake, how do you like get people to act in the right manner? And these questions the blockchain cannot answer. It is just a black box, and which will tell you what it has been told. It doesn't like have something of an individual judgment of sorts. It just works by heuristics. It works by consensus protocols. It won't like answer the questions that you want, whether something is right. Let's say that there is a Saddam Hussein, again, allegedly a bad person, because I have heard both sides of the stories. Let's say that he is a bad person and he gets the most number of votes. Now, because his election is on the blockchain, can you invalidate it? And like if you can, how do you do that? And if you do that, then you are saying that code is not law. When you say code is not law, now the blockchain does not even exist. I hope I made sense.
If you voted for the wrong person, that's your fault. Like you can't go back and change it. Like that's like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Like when, like what happens at least in my country is that every time you press a button to vote, you get a paper trail of your vote as well. And sometimes like when it goes to the wrong person, you can always go back and say, hey, like so this happened, and hopefully that can let you vote again. And you cannot do that on the blockchain. Once your vote is cast, it is cast.
What is the voting process like? Is it literally just a click of the button?
Like there is like I can give you the answer from India. So there used to be ballots over here, which I think US has in certain of its states. But now what we have is called an electronic voting machine. It is again a black box machine, not connected to the internet, cannot be hacked or whatever. And you just need to press a button on it. Your vote gets registered, and once your vote has been registered, you get a paper trail, which is called a VVPAT, a verified voter paper audit trail. I got that right. Yeah. So yeah, that's how that works.
That's how we'll be teaching classes. You can sign up at hackernoon.com /blockchain.
Class politics.
Yeah, and do check out our blockchain stories at hackernoon.com. Shameless
And this one is part of the decentralized internet writing contest. So anyone that submits a story with decentralized internet as the tag, you opt in for some prizes from Free Ton. So
Every month. Yeah.
Yep.
Where can people go to learn more about that?
Yeah.
It's called decentralized internet.
Conversation. Google it. Okay,
I
great.
think it's you set up a server in your room and you connect to something, and ideally you don't connect to any other computers because that would make it centralized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I would like to know, what are your thoughts on this entire decentralization movement? Like personally, I believe that I am too far down the rabbit hole to have an objective opinion on it. But what do you guys think? Is there hope for me, or are you guys gonna join me down the rabbit hole?
What rabbit hole are you down?
Decentralization. Everything should be decentralized. There cannot be anything that is centralized.
I'm all about that. I come from an anarchist perspective, so I feel that is very resonant with my personal philosophies. Yeah, I interestingly was chatting earlier to somebody in the marketing meeting about this, and we were talking about how the housing market in Amsterdam is absolutely insane. And a friend of ours just bought a house with Bitcoin, just done. Like everybody is losing their minds in the friendship circle, because now suddenly it's like a very real, tangible example of the fact that this can happen. And there's a lot of regret. There's a lot of sort of like anxiety about feelings of having missed the boat, about, why didn't I get into this? Because I could be buying a 400,000 euro, which is probably what, $500,000. Yeah, it's a lot of money. People are buying things that with Bitcoin that they, started hodling 5 years ago. So that's becoming very real. And for me, that's very exciting. And I think that's the fact that Venmo, I believe it was, right, just added cryptocurrency to their sort of stack and started accepting payments and transactions in crypto is just a great sign. I mean, I think in Europe alone, that means that, like a lot of countries have access to payments and transactions in that form. So we all thought that mainstream adoption wasn't going to be a thing, and it's getting there fast.
Well, the Bitcoin price speculation side of it isn't really decentralization.
Yeah.
Like your friend buying a house because they were smart enough to buy an asset that 1,000x is good for them. That's not really decentralization. That's more of business acumen. And I guess it is like of sensing that this would become worth a lot more. I get really excited about it from like, hey, we're like, how many public companies are we dealing with? Like, we're looking at a Chrome browser on a Zoom call, talking about Venmo, who's owned by PayPal. Like the trees are they owned by Braintree now? Who knows? They pass these little companies around, trade them off. I would like it to be like, I think when it wins, like Clubhouse beating, back to the early article, it's more an argument for decentralization. If Clubhouse can do Clubhouse and Facebook can't imitate it, and Clubhouse can just win that little section of the market, the more like all these businesses can have little more sustainable little circles, the more they don't have to consolidate. So that where I get really excited about decentralization is where it means businesses don't have to consolidate to survive. Because where you get into problems of monopolies and oligarchies is like people reach a certain level of their business and they have to consolidate, or consolidation is the logical business choice. And that means competition is dying in my mind. So like there is a purity of decentralization that also is in a way like very capitalistic of like keep the competition healthy. And that is like where I get a little confused about what I believe, because these seem to be competing things, but sometimes they're not.
But explain to me how it isn't decentralization to have like the capital taken away from the banks in terms of financing a home on the individual level. Like,
it totally is. And if that deal happened without even a bank mortgage and it was just a Bitcoin transfer from one owner to another, that's amazing. Like that is a great example. I just mean like the increase of value of the Bitcoin itself was all speculative. And that's something that like, it's one of the I'm mixed on it of the value of it to cryptocurrencies because it gets people attracted to look at the price of the currency. Like, how often are we comparing the euro to the dollar? Not much, but we're consistently comparing Bitcoin to everything. And that's like very good marketing, but it's not sustainable. The point of Bitcoin as a store of value is all dead if you don't know how much it's worth. So in the long term, you really need it to be steady so you know how much it's worth. So then you know how much money you have and how many goods you can buy. And you're not just seeing if it like has a good day. Let's go buy all of our groceries this week, and let's wait for Bitcoin to go back up, and we can buy food again.
But that still means
Yeah.
you're always looking at it from a perspective of its value in terms of traditional currency, right? Like, explain it like I'm 5. Like, like you're still like translating it all the time into how much you can buy today in the real world, or do you mean that we'll all be able to buy with crypto?
It's not a good thing though. But I would like to let like David like
Wait, what should I explain? Like I'm 5? Bitcoin itself or life itself?
No, you're saying like you'd like to get to the point where it's steady so that people understand its value consistently. So what metric are you using there to describe value?
I get what you're saying. I mean, like with the dollar itself, I don't think about it as much. Like, oh, the last time I took a plane, it felt cheaper. It felt more, and lately it's felt cheaper because we're still in this pandemic, whatever. But the price of groceries has gone up slightly, but it's hard to tell. When you're in the grocery store, you suddenly you come out the other side and it's more, and you think you just bought more food, or you look around, you bought the nice fish, or you bought something today that's different. So it doesn't like the dollar is so trusted, people don't think about its fluctuations. Like it's within the internal use of the dollar within America. Some people, it obviously when price goes up, it changes them, but most of the time they're not thinking about it. The dollar is worth $1. Like that's like true psychological like domination and belief. Even though the dollar is fluctuating all the time, people don't think about it. And that's where like real trust is of like, hey, I can just use the currency as a exchange and a transaction of value versus like count in your head the last 10 times people mentioned Bitcoin, did they mention the exchange rate? And then look at your euro. Think about the last time someone said euro and you bought something around Amsterdam, and did you think about the exchange rate? And the answer is probably no. But when Bitcoin, they do. So it's like, I think to mature, you have to not think about what the price of it is. And that means like the cryptocurrency has become an even more mainstream. And it could be, and
it's just another currency.
Yeah, exactly.
That you wouldn't like monitor the rate of the day.
But is it not like really good that the price of something is like just a function of the supply and demand? Like, yes, the dollar is stable, but it is backed by those same big banks and the government that like pretty much, I guess, nobody likes. The same thing about the Forex markets. So yes, like we do not talk about the euros, but if you look at the governments, they only talk about the price of particular currencies, and Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, it's the little guy, like at least according to me from my rabbit hole downstairs, is that it is the little guy showing it to the big guy. Hey, I don't need your dollars. I have my own thing.
Exactly.
The price might be volatile, but at the point when I need to spend it, I know exactly what it's worth because
really
it's on the blockchain. So that's amazing.
And it's
like completely
people driven.
Exactly.
People driven versus bank driven. That makes sense
people
too.
in China. Like there's this story. So there was this fire in China. The hash rate, which is like how much like computing power goes into solving those cryptographic puzzles that generate bitcoins. So that went down. When that went down, the price of Bitcoin crashed by what, $10,000, I guess. It was like hitting 64 when it was there. When the fire started, next day 55K, like dollars. So that's the volatility. Like it's the real version of a butterfly flapping its wings somewhere and it like leading to something else, because there is nobody else to back that up. There are no market makers in the traditional sense as you have in the government.
That's true. I'm all for decentralization because I want to take down big corp.
Yeah.
Big corp equals less diversity in North America and the world. And I am all for a more diverse and inclusive workplace and more equal opportunity for everyone to become employed and to have a career. And I think that big corp really limits that in a lot of cases. So I am all for decentralization to take down the Facebooks of the world and promote the clubhouses.
I think we
Or
should-
for it to take down the Match.com Tinders and boost up the Bumbles.
I think we should start a new company called Meritocracy and become the biggest
Ooh.
corporation in the world.
Okay,
I'm all for
sounds
it.
good.
I'll follow you anyway, David.
Ah, sweet. All right. Natasha, I think you picked another great story for us.
Yes, the final story of the day, last but certainly not least. Happy 420, everybody. With this
Yeah.
news from TechCrunch that the Cannabis Banking Act has passed in the US House with bipartisan support. Essentially, what this means is that it is safe for banks to interact with cannabis operators in states, obviously, where the legislation makes allowances for cannabis operators. And I think this is really great news. The SAFE Act, it's called Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, providing safe harbor for financial institutions. And yeah, what do you guys think about that on this hallowed day of 420?
I think that's super interesting because I remember, like, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when weed became legalized in Vancouver. And obviously Vancouver is very close to the US border, so a lot of people were investing into more cannabis industry related stocks. And there was a point in time where anyone who tried to go down to the States who had invested heavily in cannabis was getting barred from the States and not being allowed entry. So this is a very like different turnaround from like where we were 3 years ago when people were like literally not being able to enter the States because they had because they had cannabis in their portfolio.
Wow.
I've got to say, I've been really surprised by how sort of, I don't know what to call it, but Biden has been pretty aggressive on some pretty radical, and I'm saying that in inverted commas, inverted quotes, that like I feel like he's come in hotter on a lot of these subjects than I expected him to. And that's exciting. And I hope to see that the same sort of carries through in terms of the issues that you have of the criminalization of these substances and just how disproportionate the representation is in prisons around that subject. But I think that this is a really interesting step forward. And I guess the government is just realizing now that it's more profitable to work with cannabis than against it. So they're trying to capitalize on that at the end of the day.
I mean, I'm in a state where Colorado revenue was significantly benefited from legalizing marijuana, and that it's a lot of money. So the taxation of that is a lot. But the really important part of this, so I went to school in California, and I saw the movement from medical and to legalization. In early medical, why this matters so much is they were getting robbed left and right because all the medical institutions, number one, they're dealing in cash. Number two, their good is high value on the black market. And then you have like a 1-person, 2-person shop, and they are just sitting on this perfect thing to rob. So they would start to invest in all these like security things. So they had nowhere to put their cash and they're good,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, if it's like a fancy purse, it's going to get tracked. If it's a computer, it has a serial number. If it's marijuana, it's actually easier to move it in the black market. So all these people are getting robbed. Like this definitely is going to stop a lot of crime around the cannabis industry by letting them work with banks. And by letting them work with banks, it means the government's going to get more of the money because they're going to be easier to tax. So I think it's a really probably something that's overdue. Like once it's kind of like they legalize it and then they don't know what to do with the cash and the regulation, and none of these private banks want to take on the risk of it's only legal in Colorado but illegal elsewhere, so we're going to seize your money if you do business with them. So there's a lot here that like I haven't gone into all the details of how many businesses it'll protect, but those businesses were they were hit pretty hard in the beginning. Like it would be so weird. You see, like, why is there like 2 security guards, 4 cameras, and like 2 metal doors in order to get into this tiny shop? It's because everyone's trying to rob them all the time.
In the US, are the windows also frosted?
Not anymore in Colorado, but I haven't been in California.
Okay.
Much. Colorado
'Cause there's
feels
a-
like really safe now.
There's legislation here that says that any dispensary that opens needs to have their windows covered so that no one can see inside, which is
Huh.
wild too for security reasons, because if
Yeah.
someone is going in there with guns, like no one's gonna see.
And it's such a waste of resources. So many double standards over here. Like the rationale for banning marijuana was like what? Because it's a gateway drug. So they say, let's ban it. Now look at alcohol, like one of the biggest reason for drunken driving, drunken deaths, domestic abuse. And they're like, let's regulate that. Like, it should have been the other way around. Alcohol,
Yes.
like I have my own reasons for this, but the way I see it is that marijuana should have been the one that is regulated instead of the other way around. But I don't know why they have to think about this when there are so many other things for these governments to think about, and they're like, okay, cannabis owners can access banking. Okay.
Think about how much more chill the world would be if everyone was a stoner instead of an alcoholic.
Yeah, spoken like one.
I live in Amsterdam, can confirm people walk around pretty chilled here.
Yeah.
Super chill. And also it's really interesting to me to see that the US progressing in this industry when there are certain countries in the world that it's still so heavily illegal that you could get a death penalty or heavily fined or jail time for this.
Oh yeah, the entire Middle East. Like you guys call it Middle East, I call it West Asia. It's
Oh.
like, yeah, Amy.
Oh.
I am on the east of the Middle East.
And before we get into that kind of words, all right, everybody, I think that's it for this week on Planet Internet. How's everybody doing? Any other final thoughts, words of wisdom?
Sick. Happy 420, everybody.
Yeah.
I would say this
Have a
is
nice
not
one.
medical advice. These are just 4 average people reading the internet. Very average people.
Yeah. And
What-
the
what's
Speak
disclaimer
for
about
yourself.
your own research? Okay, I am an average person. You are 3 extraordinary people. How about that?
Excellent. But still not real advice. Not real medical advice.
It's
Not real medical
medical
advice.
or otherwise.
From
All right,
3
guys.
extraordinary people and 1 average person.
That's me. See you on the internet.
Bye.
Noon. Read Hacker Noon.
Bye.
Read Hacker Noon.
Bye.
Peace. Bye, guys.